Welcome to the Kofford Books Authorcast. In the Authorcast, we briefly introduce our authors and provide some basic information about the books they publish and how these books contribute to Mormon studies and Mormon writing. This episode of the Authorcast features Kyle Walker at Benchmark Books in Salt Lake City on July 15, 2015, speaking and answering questions about his new book, William Smith in the Shadow of a Prophet, recently published by Kofford Books. The original recording can be found at benchmarkbooks.com.
We'd like to welcome Kyle Walker. He received his PhD in Marriage and Family Therapy from BYU. He is the author and editor of two other books. The first was his master's thesis, right? Dissertation, on the Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith family. And that's available, printed by BYU. And then he edited a volume called United by Faith, the Joseph Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith family, that covers the parents and all the siblings of Joseph Smith, which is out of print completely, correct? But we do have a couple of hardback copies here if you'd be interested in getting them. Those are for sale. Anything else you published that I'm not aware of? Okay. And now this third book of his, William Smith in the Shadow of a Prophet. And I apologize, we've sold out of the hardbacks as of tonight, so we'd be happy to get you some more, but none are available as of this moment. Anyway, that's what we're going to hear from Kyle on. He is a member of the faculty at BYU, Idaho, and works in the counseling center there as well as teaches. Is that correct? With that, I will turn the time over to Kyle, and we'll leave it to him to present until about 7 or so, and then or a little before 7, and we'll take some questions from the audience. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here tonight. Appreciate Chris and Kurt. I've known Kurt for many years, and it's always good to be here. I wondered about the note that you showed, if William paid off that debt. I'm not sure, but it'd be interesting to know. A lot of people ask me, I guess the most frequent question I've been asked is, why would I write a biography of William Smith? And so I thought I'd just talk about that as a starting place tonight. And I remember talking to Steve Sorensen, former church archivist at the LDS Church Archives, and told him that I was batting around doing this biography of William Smith, and he said, I don't know if I'd do that for your first book. And I'm glad that I did. It's been quite a journey for me, and I've come to appreciate William and to loathe William, and I have mixed feelings about William as well. So I've been surprised about the interest in William Smith. The RLDS, now the Community of Christ Church, had a lot of interest in William's biography being published. And I think you'll come to see why, as well as other factions, other branches of Mormonism interested in his history because he affiliated with so many offshoots of Mormonism. He was also among a handful of those who were present to hear his brother's earliest recitals of Mormonism's earliest events. There's a bit of mystique around William Smith, something akin to maybe a Porter Rockwell or something, that sort of a loose cannon who had a temper, and then no one really knows what happened to him. He sort of disappears into the sunset. He's the only surviving male member of the Smith family after the summer of 1844. I think that's significant. Remember, his father dies in 1840, Don Carlos in 1841, and of course Joseph and Hiram in 1844, the summer of 1844, and then Samuel just a month later, and so he's the only surviving male member of the family. As such, his views were very significant and influential on remaining Smith family members. He was also a member of the original quorum of the 12 Apostles, organized in 1835, and was ordained church patriarch in May of 1845, bestowing more than 300 patriarchal blessings in a 4-month period that summer. What was previously published about William primarily deals with his role as patriarch and his contest over authority in the summer of 1845. And in the preface, I just mentioned some of the titles of these articles. Most research was adverse and dismissive. Prior research has referred to him derisively, including articles that included in their titles Problematic Patriarch, A Wart on the Ecclesiastical Tree, and The Persistent Pretender. And I just write that I certainly concur with some of these authors' perceptions about the challenging nature of William's leadership. By all accounts, William was a complex person who wrestled with insecurities and fits of passion that sometimes overrode his noble desires and family loyalty. But I also began to discover his vast contributions to the upbuilding of Mormonism, including his missionary success, his persuasiveness as a gifted orator, his propensity to accurately portend the future, and his charismatic leadership. I had a desire to highlight all sides of his personality, which I felt was more complex than could be captured in a single article and best evaluated over the course of his life. Outside of his brother Joseph, there are more surviving sources related to William than any other Smith family member, including Lucy Mack Smith. Thus, his life provides more important insights in understanding Mormonism's first family. For example, he has more than 300 letters, handwritten letters that have survived. Due to his prominence as a member of this family, numerous references to him in diaries and journals of early church members have survived, as well as many of his sermons that have been recorded. That allowed me the ability to really tap into his motivations, his personality, and his history. Also, with my training as a marriage and family therapist, I began to pick up on family dynamics and psychological issues which I felt were factors in understanding his complicated personality. As I immersed myself in the surviving materials, I became captivated by Smith's psyche. Due to my clinical training, I began to pick up on something that previous historians missed as they attempted to capture Smith's personality. His emotional instability is a critical factor in understanding his behavior. Such an understanding may also help explain why there are conflicting accounts about how William was remembered and perceived by those who were acquainted with him. Remembered as both rogue and respected citizen, saint and sinner, apostle or apostate, profligate brother of the Mormon prophet, or revered patriarch. Some themes that emerged in the biography were issues of entitlement, specialness about being a Smith, impulsiveness. He was quick-tempered, rigid in his viewpoints, had difficulty with submitting to authority figures. But he was also charismatic, handsome, an effective speaker and debater, and a persuasive missionary bringing hundreds of converts into the church. He also had a sensitivity to those who suffered. His wife passes away in May of 1845 after a long battle with edema, or what they termed dropsy at the time. And so there's been some letters that I found where William is writing to other saints who were dealing with family members who had gone insane. And very tenderly he writes to them and offers his sympathies, born of experience. Finally, I think that William's contributions to both the LDS Church and the RLDS Church were neglected. Among the LDS branch, he was kind of cast out as an apostate, and so his early contributions to Mormonism were never really highlighted. Among our LDS branch, he will spend 15 years with the RLDS Church at the end of his life, and they sought to distance themselves from William after his death, I think because of his history of polygamy. And so they were very neglectful in even his obituary, which is only a few lines in the Saints Herald. In fact, his wife, Eliza Elsie Sanborn, has a lengthier obituary in the Saints Herald than William has. I find that quite shocking. William contributed to Mormonism in many ways. He edited 2 newspapers, The Wasp and The Prophet. He served as a representative from Hancock County in the Illinois legislature during the Nauvoo period. As I mentioned, he was a gifted orator and made many contributions in the early history of the church. He also affiliates with a host of different factions of Mormonism after his epic break with Brigham Young and the 12 in the fall of 1845. He affiliates with George J. Adams. He affiliates with James J. Strang. He's ordained an apostle and appointed patriarch in Strang's faction of Mormonism. He re-affiliates with Brigham Young and is rebaptized in 1860, although he never gathers. And so with Lyman White as well. So he's bouncing around to all these different factions of Mormonism. A little-known piece that had largely been overlooked was his service in the Civil War in 1864 to 1865, and so I have a chapter devoted to that in the book. Let me just highlight a few things from the book that might be of interest to you. In Chapter 1, I draw a parallel between William and his Uncle Jesse. We don't have a lot of information about Uncle Jesse, but enough has survived that I think that we can make a connection between him and William. Both had a bright intellect, were informed on political and religious issues of the day, and both had a charisma that drew others to them. But they also had some glaring weaknesses in their personalities that made it difficult for them to succeed interpersonally. Again, entitled, impulsive, quick-tempered, both of them dogmatically held to their own views, and if they disagreed with others, sometimes they could be physically intimidating to get their way. So that's Chapter 1, titled Uncle Jesse. Chapter 3 deals with all of his recollections of early Mormon history. He left at least 7 detailed recorded accounts of Joseph's early revelatory experiences. Most emphasize Moroni's messages in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, which is similar to the entire Smith family. Most are late reminiscences, which is a drawback, but one was recorded in 1841. There's some important details that come out of these. I'll just highlight a few. One is that it's William who emphasizes the role of the Reverend George Lane and his influence on Joseph Smith. He dates that after the first vision, and so I speculate a little bit that maybe George Lane's influenced Joseph Smith to go when he has his experience with Moroni that results in the visitations of Moroni, according to his account. And but it's 1822, 1823, 24 even, that he remembers George Lane's influence in Palmyra. William gives us the most detailed description of the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate, and describes those in details. Another tidbit that grows out of his recollections is his participation in Palmyra's Presbyterian Sunday School as a youth. We know that Samuel and Hiram and Lucy and Sophronia all joined the Western Presbyterian Church at Palmyra. But nowhere have I read that the younger children also participated. And William describes that in detail in participating in Benjamin Stockton's Presbyterian Church Sunday School. Chapter 6, you're probably familiar that William and Joseph had some conflicts, and that began at a high council meeting shortly after he's appointed a member of the Quorum of the 12, where William disagrees with Joseph's decision ruling on a case of the high council. And that carries on for a week or several days afterwards. Eventually William gets so upset he sends his preaching license to Joseph. Joseph tries to get Hiram to intervene in their conflict. And I don't think it's resolved for William. It seems to be resolved for Joseph. But within a couple of months, it surfaces again at a debate school that William is holding at his home in Kirtland. And Joseph starts to take exception to the way that they're debating with each other and the heated arguments they began to have and proposes doing away with this debating school. And William objects to that. Joseph insists, and it passes among those who are there, the leaders that are there. William becomes so irate, he says, he schedules another debating meeting after Joseph decides to do away with it. And Joseph and William kind of exchange back and forth, and William eventually attacks Joseph and beats him so severely that Joseph said he could neither sit nor stand for some period of time. There's one account that says that he re-injured Joseph's side that had been injured in the tar and feathering incident. And in his journal that next day, he says all he writes is, "At home, quite unwell." And so let me just read to you a little bit about their exchange and kind of how they reconciled. A little bit about that. So this is the aftermath, and I think it's probably William's best attempt at self-disclosure and introspection that he has throughout his life.
What page?
I'm on page 119. Humbly, William confessed his wrongs to Joseph, and this is from a letter. "After coming to myself and considering upon what I have done," William wrote penitently, "I feel as though it was a duty to make a humble confession to you for what I have done, for what took place the other evening." The incident had spread, and his colleagues of the 12 had called him to account for his behavior. "I told them, the 12, that it would be better for them to appoint one in the apostolic office that would be better able to fill it. And by doing this, they would throw me into the hands of the church and leave me where I was before I was chosen. William indicated then I would not be in a situation to bring so much disgrace upon the cause. When I fall into temptation, and perhaps by this I might obtain salvation." He felt like his apostolic calling was above him. He continued his letter by begging Joseph to release him from the assignment, expressing worry that if he remained, there might be further repercussions to himself and the church, which there was. Referring to his temperament, William acknowledged, "You know my passions and the danger of falling from so high a station, and thus by withdrawing from the office of the apostleship and remaining a member of the church, there is still salvation for me." His reference to his passions likely referred to his quick temper and obstinacy. He lamented sorrowfully that if Joseph did not remove him from office, "I'm afraid it will be worse for me by and by." In fact, it would be surprising if Joseph had not second thoughts about his decision to put William in such a prominent calling, especially considering that out of all the 12 who were appointed or called, it was only William that Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer had reservations about appointing. And Joseph finally intervened and said he needs to be appointed in order to secure his salvation. And so if it wasn't for Joseph's intervention, they would have appointed Phineas Young, Brigham Young's brother, to the original quorum of the 12. But William's letter continues on a personal note. "Though I do not know, but I have forfeited all the right and title to the word brother in consequence of what I have done, for I consider myself that I am unworthy to be called one. Do not think I'm your enemy for what I have done. Perhaps you may say or ask why I have not remembered the good you have done for me. When I reflect upon the injury I have done you, I must confess that I do not know what I've been about. I feel sorry for what I have done and humbly ask your forgiveness. I have not confidence as yet to come and see you, for I feel ashamed for what I have done. And as I feel now, I feel as though all the confessions that I could make verbally or by writing would not be sufficient to atone for the transgression. Be this as it may, I am willing to make all the restitution you shall require. I know, Brother Joseph, you are always willing to forgive. But I sometimes think when I reflect upon the many injuries I have done you, I feel as though a confession was not hardly sufficient. But have mercy on me this once, and I will try to do so no more." Quite remarkably, Joseph and Hiram stand by William, and eventually they reconcile on January 1st, 1836. They're able to reconcile. William's temper would continue to plague him. I was able to document multiple accounts of him losing his temper and getting into fistfights. Earlier historians have speculated that his fighting was normal, a normal part of the time period. And I disagree with that, especially with the Smith family's response to his errant behavior and church members' response to his fighting. He's charged several times for assault and battery. In Lee County, Illinois, 1848, he's charged with assault and battery. I found another account when he lives in Plymouth, Illinois, just prior to moving to Nauvoo, a detailed description of somebody who insulted Joseph, and William defends him. And so it describes in detail this fist fight. William beats up a member of the Nauvoo police in 1845 because he wouldn't listen to his counsel. Elbridge Tufts was his name. And so there's these repeated documented accounts, even from his childhood, of getting into fistfights. In fact, in his history, William's history, he says, I got into a great many quarrels and fights during my youth, but I invariably came off victorious. So he kind of boasts about that. He took pride in his physical prowess, like Joseph did as well. Chapter 9 is a critical chapter in the book. It documents William's behavior after his brother's death. William is not in Nauvoo. He doesn't return with other members of the 12 in that summer of 1844. He will remain in the East with his sick wife for almost a year. And so he doesn't return to Nauvoo until May 1845. I think that's significant. And so he's kind of the self-appointed president of the Eastern branches. And he becomes friends with two questionable characters in LDS history, Samuel Brannan and George J. Adams. And we could spend time talking about each one of those in the rest of their lives. But they become this sort of unofficial presidency over the Eastern branches. And I think William liked being in the East. I think that's part of the reason he remains there for almost 2 years, from 1843 to 1845, because no one's looking over his shoulder. And he liked to be in charge. And so one of the things he does there is he begins to have plural wives sealed to him and to Brannan and George J. Adams without authorization from anyone at Nauvoo. And he didn't feel like he needed authorization. And so he marries Hannah Libby and Sarah Ann Libby, two sisters in Lowell, Massachusetts. And he also performs sealings for Adams and Brannan and bestows the sealing power on them, as well as Joseph T. Ball, although that's a little harder to document how extensive that was. And so as Wilford Woodruff makes this trip to the Eastern branches in the fall of 1844, and he is alarmed at what he finds. In fact, he goes on the stand. He comes into a meeting where Adams, Branham, and Smith are there. And when they see him, they seem to be uncomfortable. In fact, Woodruff records in several letters he writes to Brigham Young that they weren't excited to see me. And then Woodruff kind of goes through the branches and finds out how extensive they're using the sealing power and writes to Brigham Young about that. When Brigham Young finds that out, he immediately appoints Parley P. Pratt to go east and take the presidency over all the Eastern branches. And that's where problems start for William. When he feels like he's supplanted by Pratt, he writes this irate letter to Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. And it's on Christmas Day, 1844. And Heber C. Kimball writes back, he says, William basically says, why was I not consulted about Parley P. Pratt coming out here? Does he hold more authority than I do? And Heber C. Kimball writes back very judiciously and says, it was our understanding that you're going to return to Nauvoo as soon as possible, and we would like you to return to Nauvoo. When you were both there, you act in concert with each other. And so he's very diplomatic about it until he comes back. But all of these issues of feeling undermined with his authority will come up after his return to Nauvoo. So I spend 4 chapters in the book in the summer of 1845. It's such a significant period, and so much is going on. As he returns to Nauvoo in May 1845, his wife Caroline will die May 22nd, 1845, of this condition of dropsy. The funeral is held on May 24th, 1845, And William is called to account for his behavior later that afternoon, meeting at John Taylor's home. And Brandon is there. Brandon's been excommunicated by this point. George J. Adams has been excommunicated. And William's going to have a trial as well. And so they kind of go through this. But they eventually kind of sort through some of the issues that happened in the East. And William is ordained patriarch that same night, May 24th, 1845. So they kind of have this reconciliation at the end of the night. And then he's ordained to be patriarch. Well, as time goes on, William tussles about a number of things that summer. A lot of entitlement with William. He expected much of Joseph Smith's property. He took exception to the 12 publishing the scriptures and felt like that should belong to the Smith family. So in some ways, him and Emma are seeing eye to eye that summer. I'll just highlight a few things that summer. He sparred with church leaders over managing the Nauvoo police. I mentioned his beating up policeman Elbridge Tufts, which leads to a major council meeting in the Masonic Hall. He supports a gang of thieves that he had a previous friendship with, the Hodges brothers. Even pays for bail for one of them. Several of them are convicted of murder and will be hung across the river in Iowa. Bill Shepard's done some research on that incident. He complains about payment for his patriarchal blessings. So the church is providing William a home. They provide him the William Marks home to live in rent-free. They give him a carriage. They allow him to charge for patriarchal blessings. And so that's how he's earning his livelihood. And I wrote an article about this in the John Whitmer Journal about how much church leaders did for the Smith family and for William. It's really remarkable. In fact, William complains from the stand in June that not enough is being done for the Smith family, to honor the Smith family. And so the 12 will host this dinner, which has in which they serve 50 members of the extended Smith family. And they will wait on them, serve them, and William presents a toast. He's elated with the act, but within days he's expressing his dissatisfaction. He never had what he really wanted, and that was more of a governing voice in the leading councils of the church during that time. Even though he was a member of the 12, somehow he felt like he was being reined in with his authority. And it kind of becomes this vicious cycle, because the more he complains and starts to champion Smith family rights, the more Brigham Young and others start to restrict his influence. And so he's not at a lot of important meetings because of these complaints and because he's aspiring really for the presidency in time. So there's been some articles written on the patriarchal office and the scope of that authority. I really don't think that would have been the issue if he felt like he had more of a voice in the leading councils. I think he utilizes his patriarchal office and tries to expand on it once he feels like he's being reined in. And before that, he's completely in line with the rest of the 12. In fact, there's several letters where he says, Brigham Young, you're recognized as the president, just as Peter was after Christ died. He's right with the 12 up until he returns and starts to feel undermined. And then what he really wants is Hiram's multiple offices. So he wants to be patriarch. He wants to be, assistant, or Hiram's office is assistant or associate president of the church, as they term it. And that's what he wants basically the rest of his life after he breaks with the 12. Well, he has a dramatic break with the 12. He gets more and more dissatisfied as you read his letters. By August, he audaciously preaches a sermon on plural marriage, the only one of its kind, in a public discourse, August 17th, 1845 in Nauvoo. And people were there. There were sisters there that threw up their handkerchiefs in disgust. And many people left the meeting. And John Taylor, for some reason, is the only other apostle present. And so he will stand up and start to correct William. Well, William's not going to take that very well. He says, no one's going to correct me, especially when we have equal authority. So they go back and forth, and John Taylor's trying to manage this very carefully in front of the audience. And eventually they kind of reconcile. But this just shows up in lots of journals and recollections. The only plural marriage sermon I heard in Nauvoo was from William Smith. And William Clayton records in his diary, I think that what William did today hurt him in the estimation of the saints more than anything he's done before. And so by September, William's decided, well, I should back up a little bit. William wants to go east. I think he wants to go back east and kind of be over these branches again. And so he proposes to the rest of the 12, why don't you let me go east and bestow patriarchal blessings? And they say, okay, until Parley P. Pratt arrives. Parley P. Pratt arrives, and he has heard all these accounts of what William was doing in the east. And he says, don't let William go east. That would be awful. You know, he's wrecked enough of the branches in among the eastern saints. Don't let him go. And so they recant that. They had all prepared for publication in the Times and Seasons. William's going to go east, and Willard Richards will write to him and say, we've canceled your mission. We think you should stay here. And William is just upset. And from that point forward, he's going to leave Nauvoo. And so on the night of September 12th, 1845, he says, I was warned by two of my friends. One of them was his brother-in-law, Jenkins Salisbury, that my life was in danger and I needed to leave Nauvoo. And I think there's some paranoia on his part, you know, and maybe that makes sense with how much the Smiths have been threatened in Nauvoo. But he flees with his two daughters and goes across the river, and he goes to George J. Adams' home up in Augusta, Iowa. And you can see that he's on the fence about whether he's going to leave or break with Brigham Young. He writes this very lengthy important letter to Brigham Young in late September 1845, and indicates that he's going to return to Nauvoo for General Conference in October, and that he's just bestowing patriarchal blessings. But other accounts say that he didn't bestow any patriarchal blessings, and that he and George J. Adams were leagued together. He will go north, and he will publish this proclamation that they have copies of. Go north, and he and George J. Adams will publish this proclamation. And once it reaches Nauvoo, that's the tipping point for the 12, and he will be excommunicated. So after that time, he goes to St. Louis, he goes to Cincinnati, and preaches against the 12, and ironically enough, preaches against polygamy. And he will do that publicly for the rest of his life, preach against polygamy. Notwithstanding, he'll take another plural wife while he's with Strang, before Strang ever practiced polygamy, and while he's organizing his own church in Lee County, Illinois. And so I think he saw that as the best way to gather up the saints in the Midwest and in other key locations in the Eastern Saints, is to preach against polygamy and start to preach lineal succession. And so that's how he gathers a lot of saints. He has some success from 1847 to 1853. He will have his headquarters are in a place called Palestine Grove, Lee County, Illinois. He will also establish a branch in Covington, Kentucky, across the river from Cincinnati. Isaac Sheen will link himself with William, and they publish a paper called the Melchizedek and Aaronic Herald. And it has great distribution, and for a while his church really prospers until they find out that he's practicing polygamy in Covington. And his wife finds out he's practicing polygamy, or at least supporting polygamy at that time. And she will leave him, and Isaac Sheen leaves him, and that's the end of his newspaper. He retreats back to Lee County, Illinois, and he builds up his church. And Joseph Smith III will say that he had almost all of the branches, or these groups of Mormons that had broken from Strang, that were still scattered in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin, all of them will link themselves with William Smith, and he has great success. He also writes to Lyman White in Texas, and they link their aspirations together. Although they never met in person, Lyman sent his son Orange, who meets with William Smith in his home in Palestine Grove, Illinois. And so he has their support as well. William will put Lyman White in his first presidency. They have some success in the East. He establishes a branch in Philadelphia. But again, fatally, he begins to practice polygamy, and as they find that out, as his members find that out, that he's secretly practicing polygamy, they start to fall off. The other thing that upsets them is that initially he had said Joseph Smith III is the future successor of my brother Joseph, and then he morphs that into his own right, even creating some stories about Joseph ordaining him at one point to be his successor. And so once that starts to get out, even Lyman White says, you know what, they kind of have trouble with his ambition, and they will eventually leave William. But it's an important place and important teachings that he's doing among these branches in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. I argue in the book that William lays the groundwork for the RLDS Church. I don't think he's ever been given credit for it. But think about it. When Joseph Smith III then assumes leadership in 1860, okay, he's going up to Amboy, Illinois. It's 1 mile north of William Smith's church headquarters at Palestine Grove. The people who are present, Joseph will stay with the Stones. They were members of William's church in Palestine Grove. Those who are there to ordain him, former members of William's church. Who does he turn to? Who does Joseph Smith III turn to establish his Saints Herald? Isaac Sheen, William Smith's newspaper publisher. And so William's fingerprints are all over the RLDS Church, and he's really not given credit for that. Even Mark Scher's book, his new history of the Community of Christ, just gives William minimal credit. You know, another branch in the formation of the RLDS Church, very briefly. And yet Jason Briggs and some of these founding members of the RLDS Church were apostles in William Smith's church. And so I spent some time developing that a little bit. Interestingly enough, I'll just finish by telling you about William's final 30 years. He eventually retreats from all factions of Mormonism in about 1858, 59. And he will settle in the remote region of northeastern Iowa. Not sure why he went there, but maybe he wasn't welcome in some of these other places where he'd been run out of town. He will settle in there, and he keeps his Mormon roots a secret. And like many of the Smiths did, because of what they saw as persecution, he will enlist in the Civil War in 1864-65, and then return to this little town of Elkader, Iowa. And he becomes a very respected citizen in Elkader. All accounts that I found from the community for the last 25, 30 years of his life are very complimentary. And he had a great reputation there. Raised a solid family. It's like he starts over again at the age of 48. And has a family, has 3 children, has a stable wife. Gone are his exploits with polygamy. His ambition is somewhat reined in, although he's petitioning Joseph Smith III towards the end of his life to install him as church patriarch and apostle. That's what he really wants. But Joseph Smith III outweighs him with some of those desires that he had. Let me just close by sharing you an account which maybe highlights some of the conflicting aspects of his personality. In the fall of 1880, a dramatic scene played out in an obscure village in northeastern Iowa. 2 missionaries from the LDS Church in Utah were diligently seeking those interested in the Mormon message. One was 21-year-old Hiram Jensen from Salina, Utah. The second was 23-year-old B.H. Roberts, trained as a blacksmith and a recent graduate of the University of Deseret, and later a prolific writer and assistant church historian. Preaching Mormonism as they crisscrossed Clayton County, the elders heard rumors about a surviving brother of the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith, who apparently resided in the vicinity. Having never met an immediate family member of the founder of the church he espoused, Roberts resolved to track down William B. Smith. His excitement about such an unexpected opportunity was tempered by uneasiness about what he might expect. Had it been any other member of the Smith family, Roberts would likely have suffered no reticence about a visit. But this particular brother gave him pause. Resolute but apprehensive, Roberts recorded in his journal what he had read or heard about the prophet's younger brother, describing him as proud, rebellious, pugnacious, and a dominant spirit both in his father's house and likewise in the church. The elders followed the course of the meandering Turkey River and found his humble log and frame home in the hills 2 or 3 miles west of the town of El Kader. He was wary as he knocked on the door of Smith's home and was initially taken aback by Smith's sheer physical presence. Though Smith was nearing his 70th birthday, Roberts reported that he disclosed a symmetrical physical manhood, standing erect and full of form with an aggressive appearance and boldness that would well nigh surpass understanding. After noting his unusual height, Roberts described his soft but deep blue eyes, easily converted by the depth of them to almost dark eyes when animated or stirred with emotion. Smith warmly greeted the missionaries, and the three enjoyed a pleasant visit, viewed some relics from the Nauvoo period of the church's history, and dined together that evening. Smith insisted that they accept his hospitality and even gave up his own bed, sleeping on the floor so that the two missionaries would have a comfortable rest before they departed the next morning. Instead of the headstrong personality and argumentative approach he had anticipated, Roberts's interaction with Smith was completely the opposite. He recorded in his history that Smith was tame and submissive, a gracious host, a man of spontaneous faith, praying without hesitation and even requesting that the LDS elders give him a priesthood blessing to his eldest son who was sick with malaria. While Smith did attempt to explicate his idea of succession at one point, Roberts astutely avoided any potential arguments. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Smith startled the Mormons with his supportiveness, voluntarily writing a letter of introduction on their behalf to a friend who lived in a neighboring town. Roberts remembered that Smith requested the man to receive us as he would himself and see to it that no one insulted us. It was a most feeling and pleading letter in maintenance of his cheap proposition in the entertainment of Elder Jensen and me. If the previous 24 hours had not been puzzling enough to Roberts in his attempt to interpret Smith's personality, the scene that transpired as they parted only confused him further. Smith walked with the missionaries to the outskirts of town, helping them find the road that led to their destination. As they prepared to depart, Roberts wrote, Smith extended his hands, long, nervous, powerful hands, taking the hand of each of us, looked into the missionary's eyes and burst into a flood of tears. I had seen men weep before, described Roberts, but never had I seen any weep like this man. It was a veritable flood of tears, accompanied by a clinging, warm clasp of the hand. Smith's overwhelming emotional response surprised the missionaries, and they in turn were speechless about why their visit had provoked such a display. What was it that moved him to such emotions? Roberts mused in his journal. Was it the recollection of his own youth when he too, under the favor of God, had been an itinerant missionary going from house to house to present the message of the new dispensation? The question could not be determined, the missionary finally concluded, nor all the dramatic experiences of William Smith in the church at Nauvoo, Kirtland, and in New York. Thank you.
That was Kyle Walker, author of William Smith in the Shadow of a Prophet, available from Greg Kofford Books in paperback, hardback, and ebook at gregkofford.com.